right, good evening, everybody. And glad you could join us here tonight on Community Focus. I'm Kenny Fogle, and as we do every year, we try to get into political season, and it is political season now. We're past Labor Day, and it's not quite Election Day, so that's what I call political season. We're going to talk to several candidates this year to let you be more informed, to let you know a little bit about what these candidates stand for, who they are, and when you go to the voting booth, and you should go to the voting booth. I'm going to stress that over and over. You hear that in just about every interview I talk to you about this year. Please vote. And again, this is what we're here for today, is to let you know who the candidates are, to introduce people to you, and do a little education. So again, today, my special guest is Mr. Don Thrasher. Don is the Republican nominee for Nelson County Judge Executive. And as a little disclaimer, I ran for that office myself earlier this year in the Democratic primary and come up a little bit short. So just want to let you know where I come from on this. But Don did. He's the nominee. And Don, first of all, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Kenny.
I appreciate you being here. Well, tell us, before we even get started, who is Don Thrasher? Tell us a little bit about who you are. And
Well, I am originally born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Went out to California to go to school and got an education doing some learning out there. And while I was out there, I had an idea for a soda company. I had an idea for a sugar-free, all-natural diet soda, because at the time there wasn't one. So I started Thrasher Beverage Corporation, and the first product was Z-Cola. Well, originally it was Diet Zero, and then Coca-Cola had some issues with the trademark, and they said it was too close to their Coke Zero, so we had to change it from Diet Zero to Z-Cola. So the Z was originally for zero. Then about a year after that, a couple of other investors came on board, and we changed the name again from Z-Cola to Zevia, because it contained stevia. So we originally kept the Z, and so the Z under the Evia became Zevia, and currently it's now the #1 selling natural diet soda in the United States. It's actually the #1 selling product at Whole Foods also.
Well, I have a feeling that is a fascinating story that's going to take us more than the time we need today, that we may have to come back and revisit it sometime, because I really would like to talk about how a boy from St. Louis goes to California and starts his own company and does this, because I think that's fascinating. So, but you ended up back here in Kentucky. So,
yes, sir.
So what brings you to my old Kentucky home, I guess we call it?
Well, my dad and mom, they had lived here previously, and then they had moved back. My dad was suffering from congestive heart failure, and so in 2009, I moved back. About 10 years ago, I moved back because he wasn't given long to live, and so I was wanting to spend as much time with him as possible, and we had purchased a house here in Nelson County for him, and he loved Nelson County, and so he wanted to spend his last years in the area, and so he did, and he passed away in 2010, and I decided to stay because he said, he told me, he's like, before you go back out to California in that hustle bustle, take some time out, smell the roses. He'd always tell me, take time out and smell, because there is that lifestyle out there is very hectic. It's a different kind of lifestyle. You don't get a chance to slow down.
I lived out there for a little while, not in Los Angeles. I was out in the Monterey area, but I know that's a different world out there.
It is, and so I took his advice, and I stayed, and I love it here. It's a great community. Nelson County is a wonderful, beautiful place, and love it. And one of the issues I had originally with getting involved in the local politics was one morning we woke up and the road names were changed without anybody on the road being consulted on it. No one was asked about it, and so I said, this is just wrong. So I contacted Dean Watts, and he said that he had every right to do that. And I started researching because I felt it was wrong. I said, if someone lives on a road, at least one person should be asked on that road what it should be named. And just got into that whole thing, and I really saw, a lot of people say, well, you got into it because of a road name. Well, the underlying issue of the road name was why I got into it. Not because the road name was changed, but how the road name was changed. Obviously, it had to be changed, but I'm a big believer, Kenny, in that original, what our founding fathers were about is public input, inclusiveness. We already had, our founding fathers just came from England where they had a dictator, King George, and they didn't want another one. So they enshrined this into the Constitution that, we were supposed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. And when I saw what goes on at that fiscal court and how we currently have a system where it's not being, we're not even abiding by the Kentucky Constitution, because the way the magistrate and the fiscal court system is set up, it's supposed to be the magistrates are supposed to set the fiscal court, the legislative policy of this county. Currently, instead of the magistrates telling the judge executive how to implement that law, the judge executive, in my opinion, basically dictates to the magistrates what to say, what to do. They do it, and then he implements whatever he wants, either which way. And I felt that was wrong, and I think there's a lot of alternatives out there that we need to look at in terms of public participation. I know during your campaign, during the primary, you brought up blue ribbon commissions and public input through committees. And your opponent, my opponent now, he said during the debate that gave him the cold chills. Well, to be honest with you, that gives me the cold chills that it gave him the cold chills, because public participation and public input is what we're supposed to be about. That's what democratic values are about. Not about just assuming leadership and saying that's passing the buck. Your idea of a blue ribbon commission was not passing the buck. You're going back to the original, what the founders were talking about when they said that there needs to be of the people and by the people. It's not of the person, by the person, for the person. That's where we have that fundamental difference with my opponent. I guess he's been in office for 25 years, and Lord Acton, the first Lord Acton, not the second Lord Acton, famously said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And seemingly that's what we have in office now. It's like, I don't necessarily blame Dean Watts for becoming what he has. I would imagine if somebody's in office that long and has won so many elections, that you start thinking that, well, everything I think must be doing the right way because everybody else keeps validating that vote. But I don't think a lot of people that don't go to the fiscal courts and don't understand how the process is working, I don't think they get it.
Well, do you think it's fundamentally set up that way, or you think it's him personally? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, well, you talked earlier about the magistrates sort of directing the show and the judge executive being more of the employee in a way of the magistrates. Is it that way? Is it unique to Nelson County? I know you've looked at other counties. I mean, what do you see this as being endemic to us, or is this just a personal thing here in Nelson County the way it's set up?
I think we're the exception to the rule. There are other counties that are like us, but we're overall most counties, I believe, are functioning the way they're supposed to function. Mm-hmm. I think we're the exception to the rule. I think. Just given that the process has been going on for 25 years here, I think that is key in how things are playing out for our county legislative process.
Okay, and then I know we can stay here for a while because I know you and I have talked about, and I've been keeping up with your issues. And you got a number of issues. I mean, open records. You got issues with the library, special taxing districts, things of that nature. So. Would we fundamentally see differently if Don Thrasher was county judge executive than what we see right now? Well,
the number one thing is greater public input. One of the things I propose is I call it the We the People card, and what I propose is having every registered voter in Nelson County would receive a paper business card type thing with a login and a password to log into a secure county website that you would be able to vote. You'd be able to go on there, and 2 weeks in advance, everything that a magistrate gets 2 weeks before a vote, the citizens would be able to go online and look and see what that scanned item is. So if it's any particular item, you can see the same thing that the magistrates are going to be able to see, and you're going to be able to vote yes or no on that issue. Now, granted, this is a non-binding poll, but the results would be given to the magistrates before the fiscal court voted. So in other words, it's a secure ballot polling, it's a non-binding referendum poll,
right.
And it's a little bit more secure than, like
Facebook,
exactly,
right.
Exactly. And that was one of the things. And I know you're a big proponent of public input, and I think that is the ultimate. I've looked around and I couldn't find anything even remotely like it, but I think it's a really good way for us to participate, for the average citizen to participate, because as you know, one of my issues was we don't have a fiscal court meeting at night. And if people can't go at nighttime, they need some way to input their voice, and the We the People program would do that.
Well, and it is fascinating what you're talking about, because I see that, I guess, as a younger generation thing than me, because I guess I'm not, that would be something outside my paradigm, because I just hadn't thought about that. But it is fascinating that I do think at some point technology will play a much bigger role, because people will be able to, as in the past, you're far removed from government. Well, today it comes to your living room.
Yes.
So I can see where that would be a something in the future. I guess I hadn't thought of it coming this quickly, but apparently you have.
Well, I think, and like I said, it also brings an openness, because right now when you you and I go to a fiscal court meeting, we're not given what the magistrates have. The press, the media, obviously they're giving something beforehand, but for the average person, just to be able to go and look without having to do an open records request, or having to go through a bunch of nonsense to get what everybody else is seeing, the magistrates are seeing, I think that in itself is leaps and bounds towards transparency and towards an open government, and that's what we should all.
What does open meetings mean to you?
An open meeting to me means that the purpose of it is not to have things done behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think the current fiscal court, I think that there are issues there of they do not discuss things in public that they should be discussing. And that was one of your issues with the fiscal court. There is no substantive discussion on key issues. There's really no substantive discussion about anything. They go in there and they vote yes, no, goodbye. That's it. And it's almost, it borders on being bizarre. When you look at other counties, how they do legislative, and when you look at the school boards, how they operate, there's discussion, there's substantive discussion, but Nelson County Fiscal Court is just boom, 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 that's it.
Mm. Well, again, I know there's several other issues we talked about, planning and zoning. I know that's a big issue with you.
Yes, it is. I believe that the people in the unincorporated areas of this county equal about 30,000 people under the 2010 census. So there are 11 planning and zoning. The Joint Planning and Zoning Commission has 11 members. Of those 11 members, 7 of them live in one of the cities: New Haven, Bloomfield, Fairfield, and Bardstown. But those people get 7 seats, 7 commission seats. The unincorporated people have 30,000 people, and we only get 4 commission votes. So it's inequitable. And one of the big complaints, I live in Cox's Creek area, and one of the biggest complaints is we don't have a voice in planning and zoning. They just tell us what to do, and it gets done. Yeah. And I think that they're right, because what happens is you have, and Dean says, well, everybody doesn't matter because everybody's a Nelson County resident. Well, if you have 11 people that live in Maywood that are all happen to be on Planning and Zoning Commission, you tell the rest of the people in the county that that's equitable because we all live here. It's not right. Yeah. And I think the average person sees it that's not equitable. And my biggest thing is we need to add an additional 2 or 3 members for the unincorporated areas because we need to make it more equitable.
Well, speaking of equitable, you also, I know you've talked quite a bit about a formation of a different style of ethics commission. I mean,
Yes.
I know ethics is a huge issue that you've talked about for quite some time, and I guess I'm curious as to exactly what you had in mind.
Well, I think one of the issues is our current ethics ordinance has no teeth. It's a paper tiger. There's basically there's no ramification. There's no punitive measures. One of the things that I proposed 2 months ago was to disgorge a person, either a government official, if they did something unethically and they profited from it, the county would be able to disgorge them of that ill-gotten gains.
Would an ethics commission have some like impeachment authority or anything of that nature, or just investigative authority? What would they have?
They don't even have investigative authority, really. They can't subpoena anything right now.
Yeah.
So if it's so hard for them to do anything because they just don't. It's a paper tiger. One of the issues is if they find something that someone's done, all they can do is recommend it to the legislative board of that particular, like let's say if it's Bardstown Planning and Zoning Commission member, then they can recommend to the Bardstown City Council what to do. But they're not obligated to do that.
I know you've looked over the budget several times and debt, things of that nature. I'm sure that's something that concerns you. Obviously, if anytime you get into government, you're concerned with debt and where the money's coming from, where it's going to.
Yeah. Well, Nelson County, we're interesting because we have about $283 million worth of issued public debt right now. So Nelson County has issued $283 million in industrial revenue bonds. And that's a pretty high number. What that does also is it gives all the property that is subject of those IRBs, the industrial revenue bonds, are not subject to fiscal court property tax. So let's take the Heaven Hill Barrel Reserve, the Cox's Creek Barrel Reserve, for instance. That's, I think the current valuation is about $51 million is what they were valued at this year. They don't have to pay fiscal court property tax. So I get the incentive of wanting to have large companies come here and stay here. I get that incentive. In fact, I agree with it. But on the flip side of that, I think our goal should be trying to have the lowest property taxes in the state. That way it draws big business here. But to exempt these large corporations from having to pay fiscal court property tax, it puts that on the backs of the elderly, the average hardworking person that is having trouble, making ends meet. They're having to subsidize big companies' property taxes, and I don't think that's fair. I think the incentive should be to keep big companies here, to keep the distilleries here, is to have the lowest. Our goal should be to have the lowest property taxes in the area. That way, instead of exempting companies and then putting that burden on the elderly and other people that can't afford it, let's bring everything down, make it equitable for everybody else, and that way we'll keep the distilleries here. That's their incentive.
Well, when I look at my property tax bill or any other tax bill, I see school tax, I see library tax, I see soil, I don't even know what it's called, conservation tax,
yep.
Taxes, something like that. Is that something that the county judge should have any influence over, or is that just completely out of your hands?
Well, the libraries, you can, because there's a special taxing district that technically the judge executive appoints the library trustees. Now, the issue with that is they kind of if a vacancy on the Nelson County Library Board comes available, those people on that board, they pick who the replacement is. They send that name to the state library board, who then approves it and then sends it to Judge Watts, who then approves it or disapproves it. Now, the interesting thing, and this is what I've brought up to Judge Watts before, is those people those board members, library board members, can be removed for inefficiency or malfeasance. So, several of them failed to file their ethics financial filings. They can be removed for that. If they, hire face painters at $150 an hour or 2 face painters at $150 an hour, some people may say that that's inefficient use of money, and they could be removed for that. We could put the library district under the fiscal court, where it would have taxation with representation. By the way, that's what we got into the American Revolution for, was taxation without representation is tyranny. And so my position is, I say we should bring it back under the fiscal court, bring it to the legislative body that is elected by the people. That way you take it out of the hands of unelected people that don't have an interest in being reelected and spending your money on that basis.
Well, one issue that comes up every single time, and people is a volatile issue every time, is the occupational tax.
Yes.
And I know some people think it's necessary. Some people think we should do away with it. You have a stand on the occupational tax, where you think we should be or what we can do about it?
I don't think the way it's currently structured in Kentucky it's interesting, and especially Nelson County. We cap out at $75, so they can't charge any more than $75, which I also think is unfair to lower income people. If you have someone making $200,000 a year and someone making $30,000 or $40,000 a year, they're paying the same $75. I don't think that's equitable, personally. I'm not for the occupational tax per se, but if we're going to have it, let's make it a little bit more equitable for the rich and the poor.
Well, I know we touched on this earlier about having fiscal court meetings at different times so people have the opportunity to attend. If they attend, should they have the opportunity to speak?
Oh, most definitely, yes.
So basically, is there a limitation, or is there basically what would be the structure of that? Just show up, speak on what, let you know ahead of time? How would that work?
I think you should be able to fill out cards ahead of time, and you should have a 3-minute limit. You should be able to talk about anything you want to talk about that you feel. If a citizen takes time out to come to the fiscal court and they have something on their mind, we should at least give them 3 minutes of our time, if I was on the fiscal court, to hear that citizen.
Okay, Don Thrasher came to Nelson County a few years ago and wasn't real politically motivated, but now are you a different Don Thrasher now, or how does politics make you feel?
It doesn't give me a good feeling, Kenny. I don't like the negativity of it. I really don't. Sometimes you have to, in order to make a positive, sometimes you have to say what's negative in order to get to that positive. And I know a lot of people, that's negativity, but if your end result is to try and do something positive, try and give people a voice, try and make a positive impact, then you may have to get negative. And that's unfortunate, but you know what? Let's look at the end goal. The end goal for me is, I don't want to be county judge executive for more than one term. I'm 4 years. Let's make some changes that are substantive. Let's give the people back their voice. Let's give the magistrates back what is rightfully theirs. The legislative policy should be dictated by the magistrates. They're the people's representatives. I want to return the magistrates and the fiscal court back to what the Kentucky Constitution says it should be, and get out and hopefully make a positive change. That's what I want to do. This is not my passion, but I have a passion for it.
Well, the last thing is really, I guess, in the last several years, we've got a lot of negativity. In other ways, is obviously with the Jason Ellis case, the Crystal Rogers case, the Netherlands, and things of that nature. Is that something that the fiscal court should be looking into or paying attention to, or is that completely in the law enforcement area and hands off?
Well, Kenny, it's an interesting thing that you brought that up. All of the murders, or all of the crime scenes, none of them were actually in the city of Bardstown. They were all in the unincorporated Nelson County. My position is that our sheriff's department may be underfunded. If you look at the city of Bardstown, which has 11,600 people, their budget is about $3 million. If you look at the budget for the sheriffs for law enforcement, not the court services and jail transport, you're looking at, depending on what numbers you're looking at, between 2.2 and 2.7 million.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you go on the funding of what Bardstown is spending versus what the unincorporated area is spending, you know, we're underfunded on that basis alone. Yeah. I think one of the issues I think a lot of people don't realize is that for years, Judge Watts has had the final say in who gets hired on the sheriff's department. I mean, you have to understand something. The sheriff is his own constitutional position. For the judge executive to say, okay, well, I want him in my office before I hire him, or before you hire him, I think that takes away from what the sheriff constitutional abilities are. And I think that's another one. We need to return back everything to our constitutional officers. Give the sheriff hiring and firing ability. I don't think the judge executive should have the ability to call somebody in for an interview before the sheriff hires them. That's just me, and I think we should return that back to the sheriff, let them deal with it.
Well, like I said, Election Day coming up in November. Is there anything in particular we haven't covered, or anything you'd like to express to the voters you'd like to say before we get to the polls?
Well, Kenny, I just want to tell everybody that we have an opportunity. This year we have an opportunity to really make a change, because the citizens of the unincorporated parts of this county have feel disenfranchised, not physically disenfranchised, but mentally disenfranchised from the voting process. And we can bring that back to people by giving them a chance to make their voices known. The Bardstown ruling elite have ruled this county for so long, they have forgotten the words, "we the people." And on November 6th, it's not just going to be Election Day. November 6th is a chance for us, we the people, to take back our county day. And Kenny, I thank you for trying back in May to run against Judge Watts, and I hope that November 6th we can make a change and make a difference, because we the people is what this county should be about. We need genuine public input, and we need to have, the little guy needs a voice, and I want to be that voice.
All right, well, it's up to you now. Like I said, and we've asked this over and over, and we'll say it over and over, is we please go out on Tuesday, November 6th and vote. Be active in doing this. I mean, like I said, make a decision, and hopefully we can be a part of that decision and help you be more informed and more educated and ready to go. Don Thrasher, a Republican candidate for Nelson County Judge Executive, and thank you for taking the time out of the day being with us today.
Thank you.
We appreciate you doing this and wish you all the best. And again, stick around. A lot more come on the before voting day, but again, please pay attention and please do your best to get out and vote on Election Day. We'll be back in just a few minutes on Community Focus on Channel 6 TV.